Well, good afternoon. Untangling the organizational knot. The question of what should my target operating model be comes up in nearly every engagement with customers that I have. As a former customer myself, I used to ask the same question. But do we not know how to do this? Surely we just need to be more agile. Well, actually we tried that with integration teams, fusion teams, and they didn't work very well. We tried to put more governance in. We had a steering group reporting to a board, reporting to the PMO, didn't work. So let's change everything. Let's smash this thing together. Let's photocopy somebody else's culture. Let's read a how-to guide on how to do this. Let's change absolutely everything in the organization. Let's bring in Acme Consulting. And of course, out pops the target operating model. Any questions? Let's remember why we're here. On this stage last year, I actually presented a presentation called How to Not Sabotage Your Transformation. And I talked about breaking down business outcomes into constitutional parts. And it's really important as leaders we remember actually how and why putting teams together. If you look at these two axes here, the autonomy on the vertical, the predictable on the lower one there. If you're in McDonald's cooking fries or building a house or implementing an ERP or creating a loyalty program or reinventing retail, how you put that team together with either really high autonomy or very high predictability is actually going to be really crucial. And when you overlay on top of that, this question of should I build or should I buy? These ideas of genesis, custom built, product or utility, these are big decisions for the business outcomes. Now, for the rest of this presentation, I'm going to focus on the left. If I want to compete, if I want to build things, if I want to really put teams together that need high autonomy to compete, how am I going to do that? Well, when you look at the modern organization, we've put Band-Aids everywhere. We put Band-Aids when we have blow-ups, when we have audit actions that go awry. And these rules come together to actually give us really bad flexibility. In fact, those rules aimed at 1% of employees handcuff the other 99%. And bureaucratic solutions to this do not work. I find it interesting when you look at the Paperwork Reduction Act. Paperwork actually increased. So what are we going to do here? Because bureaucratic solutions to complex issues do not work. The reality is, you're going to have a hairball with a lot of knots. Every organization I work with has this. So how do we go forward? Well, we know how to do this for technology. For those of us that are familiar with Martin Fowler's strangler fig pattern, this idea of a plant that actually embeds itself in the top of a tree in Australia, grows down the tree and eventually strangles the tree. We know how to do this for technology. If you look at Amazon.com all the way back, and Jeff Bezos actually wrote the HTML behind this, by the way, through to today, which we all know looks like this being an entire decomposition of services and teams dedicated to looking after this. They've strangled that technical debt multiple times over the years. We cannot use the same pattern on our most precious resource, our humans. We can't do that always. Well, we know that actually business value is often and repeatedly created at often the lowest value of our organization, when teams actually leverage their interpersonal relationships across divisions to bring skills together to get business outcomes done. And I use the word business outcome really deliberately. Not product, not an agile sprint, a business outcome. Because you've got to open your mind up, as we all know, to things are changing every single day and we've got to adapt. Now, systems thinking tells us that perfect organizations cannot be designed, they can only be developed. So before we go on, let's look at some tenets. You may know in Amazon we love tenets. Let's look at some principles. Your organization has no end state. This fallacy of, well, when we finished our journey, no, there is no finishing your journey. It's always ongoing. Your organization exists to deliver outcomes against a purpose, whether that be commercial purpose or, for your public sector, a mission purpose. And agility is the only competitive advantage. People often talk about moats. Agility is your most powerful moat. This is actually the original narrative paper that was written by Rick Dalzell. Who was Rick Dalzell? He was the last CIO that Amazon actually ever had. And he wrote the two-pizza team paper, which I'm showing you here actually for the first time. Now, some parts of this are blurred out, but the essence of this was actually behind Amazon's desire to move to small business outcome teams. What's really interesting in my team, we're all former CIOs or CTOs who led an all-in transformation. As we tried to move towards this, we actually found, just a few of us working on this challenge, 155 different blockers from our own journeys as we tried to move to small, purposeful business outcome teams. It is actually not easy. But cloud absolutely makes it doable, but we've got to get out of the way of ourselves to make it achievable. So with that in mind, let's look at some practical tips you can take and do to achieve this. The first is, you've got to be highly aligned. You know, if you think back to Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo, when he used to send off field orders to his commanders to run to make a change, it would take an hour for that change to become effect. Command and control does not work in our modern businesses. Things are happening too much. You know, when people come to me and go, I've got a 5-year plan, I'm like, really? You have a 5-year plan? Did you expect the pandemic? Did you expect inflation? Did you expect? All these things are continually changing. The commander's intent is a much more useful mental paradigm. We need to capture a mountain. We need to capture an objective. And allowing the lower levels of the organization to achieve that with autonomy. But as leaders, we want to make sure they're doing the right thing, they're going in the right direction. Because with increasing autonomy, if you don't have the right alignment, then all sorts of weird things can happen. We want to be in that top right-hand quadrant, where we're going fast in the same direction. Being agile is not the goal here. It doesn't matter how good you are today. If you're not better next month, you're no longer agile. And one of the most powerful things is actually, as a leadership team, have you agreed your principles? So many people strive and reach for methods first before principles. One of the most impactful principles when I was a leader was actually moving to the principle, if you run it, you support it. Now that's easy to say, but in a highly siloed organization, it's very disconcerting to a lot of people, let alone the fact that people go, what about segregation of duty? Segregation of duties at an individual level, even in a highly regulated enterprise. So guiding principles are really important. You know, optimizing for speed, build to differentiate. Feel free to take a picture, by the way, of any of these slides. You know, these actually, as a leadership team, agreeing your principles. How are you going to hold your teams accountable if you've not established your principles? If you really want those high judgments to be used at a lower level, you've got to establish your principles. So highly aligned. And by the way, I'm going to put a recap of all of these things in the final slide. What about autonomy? You know, how are you optimizing? You know, I used to run release trains of teams. It's a bit like a supertanker. It's hard work. You actually much prefer teams that can go fast, and cloud absolutely enables this. But how much is too much autonomy? I mean, everyone doing what they think is best isn't autonomy, it's anarchy. It's anarchy. You've got to find the sweet spot here. You've got to have the right mechanisms to inspect so that team's performance and the organization doesn't drop off as a team goes off in the direction. And experience drives this autonomy. All of us in this room are very experienced. We all know our best tutor has been our failures. So we want to allow teams to still fail on this journey to experience. And you've got to give them a mental model. You may be familiar with this mental model in Amazon. Is it a one-way door or a two-way door? One-way door are big decisions where we walk through the door and we can't turn around. For us as an Amazon, that would be building a region. making sure that a service is now compliant with a new policy or a legal attestation. We can't, once we've done that, we can't not be compliant. But most decisions in business, you actually can walk through and turn around and walk back. But people are afraid of failure. You've got to make it super comfortable. One customer I work with has Failure Friday, where they talk about their failures. I love that idea. Here's an interesting one. Dependencies are defects. You know, in the modern organization, scarily, 80 to 90% of teams are waiting for other teams. That's shocking. So are you actually treating human and technical dependencies as defects? One of the most interesting conversations I have here is for teams that are running ahead. They're doing amazing things and they're finding themselves held back. And one of the questions I always ask is, would you have a cloud engineer in that team? No, we're waiting for the central team to give us some resource or we put in tickets. Like, no. Why have you not actually got cloud engineers in your teams? You know, we all strive and think that we can have a full stack engineer and she or he can do everything. And I think that's a fallacy. You expect somebody to know everything from front end to back end, all the way down to ASIC and binary encoding. I've never really met them. So teams have got to be self-sufficient. If a team is demanding something, that's a defect and we've got to treat it so as leaders. What about technology? Well, these teams have got to be loosely coupled. You know, moving to a point where teams do publish their own API, do control access to their data. It takes a long time to do this. It took Amazon years to achieve this. I know it doesn't happen overnight. But to truly decouple and get to a point where teams can technically be dependent on each other without requiring a human interaction, this model works. And you notice I say modular services, not microservices, because teams are going to probably own multiple modules of components. Yes, there may be microservices or functions in there, but that modular approach works. And you've got to minimize those technical dependencies, because we all know a team is only as fast as the slowest team it depends on. Ultimately, if you really want to maximize the undifferentiated heavy lifting, then teams have got to be focusing on the logic between those elements and leveraging utility-based services to maximize the work they're not doing. And I know, I'm an engineer at heart. I love to build things. I love to build things. So many times I'm like, I'll build that. Why? It's a solved problem. I remember in the final role, before I left my previous company, I had a team building an authentication service for over a year. They were passionate about it. I realized it was the wrong thing to do. It was now a utility service. I halted the project before it went live. I do not regret that. I've never regretted halting a project before it's got live. I've always regretted halting a project or not letting a project go live without halting it, though. It was already a utility service. Why are we building this thing? What else happens when you try to move this way? The business are telling you how to do things, and IT are telling you how to do things. This mental model of the business and IT, it's a misnomer. Especially in nearly every company I work with, IT is fundamental to every single aspect. We are the business. We are the business. But when you actually look at getting things done and you go in IT, we're going to be agile. And you go, we've got a backlog, next, develop, 2-week sprint, awesome. What really happens in reality is this. Wait a minute, we've got to do integration testing. Oh, wait a minute, now we need to do acceptance testing. Now we've got to do release planning because we've got to drop this in a release with other code that's going in at the same time. Actually, we've got some new requests coming in that our business partners need to be aware of. We've got to prioritize those requests, of course. And then we've got to do some proof of concepts. We've got to wait for approval for budget for that. And what else? We need to do some more IT concepts on this idea. Yes, congratulations. You are truly Wagile certified right now. You've got to think beyond just technology. Engagement with the CFO, with all your executive committee members, is crucial. What about focusing on outcomes? Boy, do teams fall into the busyness trap. I've been there. We've all been there. You're working in a team of 5 to 9 people, maybe 6 of them are busy. I know, I'll start something new. Oh. The busyness trap. Are you really focusing on what matters here? Are you focusing on the outcomes? Are you minimizing the outputs, by the way, on this? Because we can't actually change outputs. We can only manipulate the inputs. You've got to work backwards when these teams are starting elements. Why are you doing this? What are you doing? What's really interesting to me as we write Amazon narratives, we have something like, do not write weasel words. This language here would be immediately pounced upon in an Amazon document. Improve customer satisfaction. Create a positive vibe. We're using superlatives and adjectives here which are not at all data-driven. How about moving or holding your teams to a higher bar? Let's be audacious. Achieve NPS of 80% with our mobile app. Key results, improve system reliability, implement in-order personalization. These are tangible things that we're striving to achieve. And what are the inputs as a leader you can actually help a team manipulate when they're doing this? Redundancy, monitoring, load balancing, scaling priorities, instant response plan. Are they both building and supporting and iterating on this in the future? So your inputs you can control to achieve your outputs. You cannot directly manipulate outputs. What about the right size team? What are we doing with that? I love this quote. Not finance, not strategy, not technology. It is teamwork that remains the ultimate competitive advantage, both because it is so powerful and so rare. We've got to make the time as leaders. And it's hard, because we're back-to-back from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. We're running from crisis to fire all day long. You've carved out some precious time to be here today, which is awesome. But building your team, without it, we're nothing. And what does a team look like? Is it the right size, the right people, the right culture, the right skills? What does that mean when we break it down? Well, right size is something I've come to painfully learn over the years. Here, we've got 8 people. 28 lines of communication for just this one. The math is really simple. We know adding more software engineers to a late project will only make it later. So you've got to get the teams and the outcomes and what this team is owning correct. And it's got to be small enough to build this trust, but large enough to deliver meaningful outcomes. Right culture. The culture comes up so often. You know, even anthropologists who study culture can't agree what it means. I love the quote from the CEO of Airbnb where he says, culture is a shared passion, a shared purpose done with passion. You know, culture, you've got to have these things here happening. Otherwise, you need to take action. You've got to have the right skills. The most successful skills, when they've done the research on this, the most successful teams, by the way, have a mix of very experienced tenure, diverse worldviews, and inexperienced juniors who actually bring a very fresh perspective to how things are going to work. And yeah, you've got to have the right people. We all know this. And it's hard to stay productive. It's so hard to stay productive with the world swirling around us. But even how we prioritize our work at a team level is important. When you actually look at the scientific research, humans actually aren't that very good at multitasking. You know, when we look at delivering even 3 projects and we're multitasking here, we'll probably end up doing this. When we know that actually if you single task, even though people in the team will think, I'm not busy at the moment, you actually deliver things earlier. And again, teams have to be trained on this because it's not necessarily natural to them at all. And that shocking figure, that 80 to 90% of many teams are waiting for other teams. Like, how are we going to get this lean? If teams are blocked, or teams are dependent on other teams, we've got to step in as leaders and take action and automate. If a team isn't getting through something because they've not got a firewall engineer or a network engineer or even a lawyer to sign off legal assertions, let's get them in that team. Let's unblock them. Let's automate it so we can move forward. Let's stop starting and start finishing. And I know it's hard to do because of that busyness trap. What about well-controlled? So many organizations have put gates in place for those sticking plasters I showed on one of those early slides. They put gates in place. And we've got to move to the approach of guardrails wherever we possibly can. It's really interesting when you look at how Amazon teams deliver. 3 core tenets at the heart of it. Breaking things down, treating teams as autonomous businesses, automating everything. And when you actually look at their continuous integration, continuous deployment pipelines, they're focusing on being really fast, working on very small things, only local code branches. When they move into pre-production, they're actually looking at their dependencies, packaging it up, and when they actually roll into production, there's 3 types of accounts, of AWS accounts, that are used. Beta, Gamma, and production. And the rollout here is automated, and over in production, we only use a tiny amount of traffic bleeding into that new piece of code delivered in a very small piece of the overall services space, with careful canaries monitoring any degradation out of the expected and automating the rollback. So you're right to focus as much as possible on allowing this for code when you're building on that left-hand side to differentiate your business for speed. Now, what does this change mean for some classic IT functions, like enterprise architecture? Architecture has never been more important than it is today. How architecture is done has never been as important as it is today. Do you need a front-end architecture? I would argue maybe not. I say far better to embed the architecture and the engineering expertise into that team. In Amazon, we call them the P engineers, by the way, the principal engineers. They have the most experience, not necessarily the most tenure, but the most experience and can technically lead the team of the challenge that they're trying to accomplish. When we have multiple teams that have to come together, very often the P-level engineers get together to solve it. I used to have 12 teams coming together in a release train. I would have a director of engineering supervising that overall intent. What about security? I love this quote from C.J. Moses. The security group should not be the group of no. If your security team is the group of no, you've got the wrong security team. Security should be an enabler, and we should be part of the process all the way through. What about long-lived? Disbanding high-performance teams is worse than vandalism. It's corporate psychopathy. But we've also got to understand, and teams have got to understand, and we've got to educate them, that in the long term, they've got to keep shifting left to new things. What they're building right now will probably become a utility in the future. And there are stages of development that we've got to make sure they're going through. And many of us have seen this already, you know, the forming analogy, the storming analogy, the norming, the performance, and eventually adjourning. And as leaders, what can we focus on in each one of these? Well, attrition and hiring. Attrition and hiring. We know, and certainly when I was a CTO, 80 to 90% of what I was focusing on was the people element. Storming, coming together, pair programming. How do you get a high-performing team to learn from each other, particularly when you've got diverse technical skill sets and worldviews? Get them to build something together side by side. They've got to be focusing on delivering those business outcomes, irrespective of what skills are needed in the team to achieve that. They've got to keep shifting left and know when to build and what not to build. Crucial that they know that. It's so easy, I know as an engineer, to want to build something because it's fun rather than focusing on what is going to deliver a business outcome. And is what this team doing at risk of being replaced by a product or utility, and continually asking that question? And as humans, boy, do we love to get consciously comfortable in our state of mind of what we're doing, when we should be striving to actually be consciously uncomfortable with learning. DevOps is actually not a new thing anymore. People often strive for it first as a method, rather than establishing their principles. And then they get really confused. What does it mean at its essence, right? Because for a team to have agility, cloud is like the ultimate enabler of a former customer. And that means they're going to own some things now, right? They're going to be owning their cost footprint. They're going to have observability for alerting and rollback. They're going to support their services all year round. They are going to be striving to automate everything. They may be using a pipeline that's just for them, but the tooling around that, yes, obsess about automating it. They're going to iterate continually. That can be very expensive. So you've got to consciously make sure this business outcome is the right thing to build. They're going to own the security of their service. They're going to engage with the security team. They shouldn't be waiting for the security team to do something. And they're on call. So irrespective of, if I go back to that former slide, of this, think of principles. Principles before methods, so you can hold people and yourself and the rest of the leaders to a principle when you're making decisions. And what you're really trying to get to, and when you read many of the DevOps books, IT Revolution as a publisher has some amazing books, Gene Kim. It's all about the flow. And we all know what this looks like. We've all been really in a problem. And we're solving it, and we're loving it, and we've minimized our distractions, and our phone's off, and we've eliminated everything, and we're enjoying it, and then something disrupts it, and it's almost consciously painful. We're striving to get this flow state established. That's what we're striving for. What else when you're doing this? Parkinson's law. Boy, have I seen this happen so many times. Work expands as to fill the time available for its completion. At reInvent, I actually do the breakout session, completing a large-scale migration and modernization. One of my key lessons learned of migrating workloads was if you gave a team 2 months to do a workload, they'd take 2.5 months. One of the really interesting things I say to teams when I'm working with customers is, how about you challenge a team to re-platform a workload in 2 weeks, otherwise you're going to rehost it for them. Oh my gosh. You constrain a team like that, they'll perform miracles for you to re-platform it. So have that as a principle, because Parkinson's law is so true, and we all know it. We'll think about it. And when you're going through this, journey, I love this quote from Voltaire, and I often talk to customers about it on their own journeys. Perfect is the enemy of good. Now there's some things though that you want to be right. Security, durability, availability. They are typically non-negotiable. But everything else is negotiable. Everything else is negotiable. So take these 6 principles, but don't just put them on a poster, please, on the wall, or on a mouse mat, or on a business card. Because I've done this, and it doesn't work. Actually take away these things. Challenge yourself and the rest of your leadership team to think about them every single day. Because we've got to deliver business outcomes faster. Agility is the only thing that protects our business. And with that, I'll say thank you very much for today.